Welcome back to In the Zone. Pete Coles, Pistol Pete, Rich Sutter, back in the seat, fired up, ready to go.
Recharged, rested, and relaxed.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful out here. It is August 31st. I'm sad. August 31st means we're coming to the conclusion of summer. Although September in New England is beautiful. And so I'm looking forward to some of that. It's 74 degrees here today and absolutely gorgeous. So we're back in the studio, rocking and rolling today. And I wanted to start off with a big set of Feed 'em Fish, Pete. We're going to have 3 Feed 'em Fish segments right now. We're fired up. We're ready to go. And here we go. We're going to jump right in. So the first segment of Feed 'em Fish is a little bit of a sad moment in that up at Westfield State, we're going to be losing one of our colleagues to retirement. And she is, as much as you are the MVP down here, Pete, this lady is absolutely the MVP of our athletics department. The 2 people that work up in our athletics department basically not seen, not really notarized like the coaches and everybody else that's associated with the program, but they absolutely are the straw that stirs our drink. Terry Hamill is retiring, and she's moving on to the greatest job in the world. We didn't lose her just to retirement. She's taken a new position, and that position is Nana.
Nice.
And it is going to be amazing. She'll always be part of our family, but I did want to take a moment just to recognize Terry because there was not a moment that she entered into the workplace with us, not a moment was there where she was not 110% full speed for those student athletes and everybody associated with our athletic department. That's something that I revere and I respect greatly. And she came to work every day with attitude, came to work every day with excellence, and came to work every single day as a part of our team. We are going to miss her greatly. And I'm hopeful that we can show this to her at her retirement party that's coming up real soon. So we're going to really hustle to get this thing going today. But I wanted to start off today with an absolute superstar, Terry Hamill. She's going to be Nana. And it is going to be beautiful. And so we're going to miss her greatly. I will miss her greatly because there's somebody that my office is right next to her chair, and I can't tell you the amount of times I've brought her out of her chair to help me, to fix something that I had messed up, or just to talk to sometimes about different things going around. And so she was a trusted friend and a trusted colleague. And there's not a lot of that going around, and I'm going to miss her. And so I just wanted to start off today with a Feed 'em Fish. Terry Hamill, you're number 1 and you know it.
Congratulations, Terry.
Yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. All right, part number 2. I grew up in New York. And when I grew up in New York, our political situation down in New York was if our politicians weren't upside down by the time they were in office, there was something wrong. And so it was a situation where it was constantly, as a young gentleman who liked politics, I really, really grew up in that situation. It was a bit of a mosh pit and a cauldron of politics. New York's politics have always been a little bit on the frenetic side, as they say. But I wanted to take a moment and Feed 'em Fish because, and I'm not going to get into the reason, I'm not going to get into any of this, but sometimes our politicians do a great job for us. Sometimes they step up and they fight for us. And there's 2 gentlemen in this town who I think are absolutely incredible at what they do. And in the same vein as Terry Hamill, that's the vein I wanted to keep rolling with here is these guys show up every single day and they fight for us. And when you elect somebody and they stay true to what they're supposed to be doing and they do fight for the people, there's something rare and there's something very special about that. So the first shout out we're going to give is to Mikey. That's what I refer to him as, Mikey. Okay? He's Mike McCabe, our mayor, and he is somebody that I have unbelievably great respect for. But again, when it's time and time comes and this push comes to shove and you need your politicians to step up and stand for you, Mike McCabe's the guy you want standing. I can assure you that. And I'm going to go to this next gentleman because he's another gentleman I've watched since he's a young man, and I have tremendous respect for him. And I think his future is extremely bright in the political forum. John Vilas, same thing as Mike, comes out swinging every single day for the people of this area, and I love it. I love it. I wanted to take a moment today because I'm not going to get into anything about the issue. I'm not going to get into anything around that. What I am going to say is I'm proud of these gentlemen by the way they bring it, and I'm really, really excited that they represent us, and I feel comfortable, and I feel that they're loyal to their mission, and that's very, very rare these days in the political forum. So I just wanted to say thank you to those two gentlemen as well. Last segment on the Feed 'em Fish, Pete, before we get back into the records from last week, because I really kind of enjoyed that last week with the records and stuff like that. And I really wanted to get into some of the collegiate records as well, too, because we touched really on the NBA last week as well. But the last piece I wanted to get into, and Pete asked me about this, and we had the opportunity, my daughter and I, to go see Bruce Springsteen. It was my daughter's second show, and I've lost count at how many I have, but it's well over 120, 125 now.
Wow.
And it's something that's been a real defining moment in my life, I got to really say to you, because it started with me as a 15-year-old boy. And I used to drive everybody in my house crazy because, Pete, you'll remember this. There was an arm that went on your turntable when you were playing a record.
Yep.
When you brought home an album, there was an arm. And if you lifted that arm up, the record would play over again. So I would just lay in my bed with my basketball, shooting it up to the ceiling, listening to Born to Run over and over and over again. The arm would go up, the record would end, it would go right back and start the album all over again. It drove people in my family absolutely insane. But it's where I started with him. I saw him in 1975 in the Bottom Line in New York. Shortly after that, they declared him the face and the future of rock and roll. And that's exactly what he has become. You cannot talk about rock and roll without Bruce Springsteen in the picture. And now we're coming to a situation where I was there with my daughter the other night, and it was a bit of a moment that I really had trouble kind of even processing myself and trying to understand. But I actually, when I show up at the concert, I feel like I'm seeing an old friend when he comes out on stage. That's how connected some of the fans are to him. And when I see him come out on stage, I can almost feel what he's feeling at the moment. And he had skipped 2 shows previous to that because he wasn't feeling well. And so I was curious to see how he looked and how everything was going. And when he came out, it looked like maybe it was his back that was bothering him to me because he looked a little ginger, you know. But there's also something going on with him that's also something I wanted to touch on today too, because it really struck me when I was sitting in the crowd, because Jordan and I got such great seats. We were pretty close, and we could see him. And when he came out, he looked physically good, but emotionally there's something dragging on him. And what's dragging on him is death, unfortunately. And the surrounding of himself with, because he talks about a song that he sings, Last Man Standing. And Last Man Standing is actually real about his life in that he started out with a band called the Castiles when he was a young lad.
Yep.
And he's the only member of the Castiles that's still alive. Clarence Clemens was the great saxophone player and the defining moment of Bruce Springsteen's career. And also, I think, a defining moment in American history a little bit, because there's no greater sound when the two of them played together for me. And that's what happens when we combine all of the races of our country and work together. That's where the beauty is, and that's where it was for me with Springsteen and him on that album cover, draped over each other like friends. And to lose Clarence, to lose Danny Federici, were really, really moments that I think have hit this guy in a way that it really shows now to me. I can feel it when I get to the concert. And what I wanted to say to him was, just personally, if there was ever any moment that he might hear this, is, you're the greatest of all time. Keep your head down until the finish line. don't start looking up. Because when you start looking up, you forget what you're doing. Just keep being the greatest. And then when it's done, we'll look up. But while we're doing it, don't look up. So that's the last piece of Feed 'em Fish. I love the man, I really do. I feel connected to him in some way, some kind of strange way. But that's what it is, Pete, on the Feed 'em Fish front today.
There you go.
We came out a little hot, but a good hot today. A good hot today, I thought. Okay, so we were going over records and talking about Robert Parrish and some great records that he had as far as games played and the most games played in NBA history. When I saw his name come up, I was a little surprised. And it's one of the things I liked about going through this exercise is that it is a little surprising. One of the surprising things is in most of the categories that you're looking at here are statistical categories and anomalies. And they're something that's accumulated over time. And so they have bearing as well, I think, when they're accumulated over time. But what was interesting was Larry Bird was really absent from almost all of those records. And I found that to be something that I wanted to consider a little bit. And I still think
About how clutch he was, though.
It's just visual for me. I was there. I saw what he did. I saw what he did in college with a team that nobody couldn't have gotten to the finals. And they lost in the finals. I saw what that did when it motivated him. And then Magic Johnson in his rookie year, what that did to motivate him. Mm-hmm. And then to see the whole totality of what he did and who he was and how he conducted himself, I think, with all things being said, to me, he's still the greatest. I love Michael Jordan as well, but to me, he's still the greatest.
Isn't it interesting how Boston franchises had both Larry Bird and Julian Edelman, the two greatest players who will probably never make it into that stats level, but they were the two greatest players of their era.
And so you throw Edelman in there, nobody would ever have him in the conversation as the greatest wide receiver of all time.
Right. But yet he was the most clutch in so many times.
In that moment, there was nobody better.
Right.
In that snapshot of a moment, there was nobody who ever did it better. Yep. That's one of the things I really love about sports. In that snapshot of a moment, I remember as a young man, Bernard King going for back-to-back 50-point games in the Garden. I mean, nobody could stop him. It was just in that moment. There was never a basketball player I saw play the game better than that. It didn't last for Bernard King for a myriad of reasons. But he was a sensational player back in the day. Albert King, his younger brother, was a great player growing up with me as well, too. But Bernard King, back-to-back 50s in the Garden, in that moment, nobody could stop him. Nobody could stop him. I saw Willis Reed have 36 points and 36 rebounds.
Wow.
Tell me that gets done a lot today. 36 points and 36 rebounds. There were, however, a lot of differences in here that I saw that were interesting as well too, and some records that you and I talked about last week that probably going to be around for a while. I don't know if you get John Stockton. I don't know who's going to catch LeBron now.
Right?
Because he just eclipsed Abdul-Jabbar, who's been retired for some time. So I don't know who's going to catch some of these guys, but it'll be always interesting to watch, and we'll be telling you on Feed 'em Fish how it goes. But let's get back into field goals made. The most field goals. So you would think that this person is the leading scorer, but it's actually in reverse, but there's probably a reason for that, and that's probably somewhere found on the free throw line. So Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is still first in field goals, the most field goals made. So LeBron James obviously made some of that differential up in three-point shooting, which Kareem wasn't really noted for. And LeBron James also might have a slight edge from the free throw line as well, too. Because although Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was a center, his sky hook was such an effective weapon that he didn't get fouled a whole lot. People just, after a while, said, you're not going to be able to stop it, so just let him shoot it.
Let him go, yeah.
And stay on your ground, block out. And so he didn't get a lot of contact that way as well because it was such an innovative move that he had. It was almost like watching Tai Chi almost. When he would go into that sky hook, it was mesmerizing. And he was really, really efficient with it. Karl Malone is third. That's interesting. Wilt Chamberlain is fourth. Michael Jordan is fifth. Kobe Bryant is sixth. That's royalty right there.
Yeah, sure.
That's basketball royalty right there.
Yep.
You know, I really, my Uncle Harvey loved Kobe Bryant. Loved Kobe Bryant. We sat together in his apartment in 75th Street and West End Avenue the day that Kobe Bryant died in that plane crash, in that helicopter crash. And he was absolutely devastated by that. He was a diehard Knick fan. Went to Knick games all the time, but he was a New Yorker, and he absolutely loved Kobe Bryant. And it's interesting to see him on this list where he is. And right below him is the guy that was a tandem of Kobe's, is the Big Shaq Daddy and the Big Shaq Diesel. Shaquille O'Neal's at number 7. Dirk Nowitzki's at 8. Elvin Hayes is at 9.
That's a throwback.
That's a throwback. And I want to tell people that weren't around back then that throw these names around as these great players, you cannot consider some of the great low post players of the game without consideration of Elvin Hayes. I'm talking about his college career, I'm talking about his pro career, and I'm talking about visual. Him and Olajuwon, to me, were the two biggest low post problems to cover that I ever saw. They were so quick. They had such up and under fakes, and they were always keeping people off balance and then shooting shots that you just didn't think could possibly go in, but boy, they went in, and they went in at an unbelievable clip. So I was, as a young man, Elvin Hayes, again, I'll go back and get regressive a tiny bit, but that's the first college basketball game that I ever really watched was Elvin Hayes against who was Lou Alcindor at the time, and that was a big marquee game, and it was unbelievable. But at the end of the day, Elvin Hayes took care of business in that game.
Sure.
His team won, and they took care of business. That was one of the only times Jabbar lost in college. There wasn't a whole lot of times that he lost. And so we got Hakeem Olajuwon in the 10 hole. Very, very interesting. Karl Malone in the 3 hole. I was surprised at that a little bit, but not bad. Here goes field goals attempted. Number 1, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Who was chucking them up?
That means he took the most, yeah. And I think that, with Kareem, you wanted him shooting the ball, so him taking a lot of shots is not surprising to me. LeBron is 2nd. Karl Malone and Wilt are 3 and 4. There were times when nobody else on the 76ers actually shot the ball when Wilt Chamberlain was playing. So he scored 100 points in the game against the Knicks, and I was lucky enough to work with a guy named York Larisi, who was in the NBA around that time, and I'm pretty sure he was in that game when Chamberlain scored his 100th point. York Larisi was a North Carolina legend and somebody that I got to work with at some camps and stuff, who's an unbelievable shooter of the basketball and a great shooting instructor himself. But Yorkie talked about that game, and he said they just gave him the ball every single time down the floor. They were trying to absolutely humiliate the Knicks with that. And the Knicks were doing everything they could to try and stop them, and they just couldn't stop them in any way. And so Wilt Chamberlain, it's hard to say that he's underrated.
Yeah, no, he's perfectly rated.
But I think he's a tad bit underrated because he was really as good. Nobody's ever come close to scoring 100 points in a game.
It's true.
Nobody ever averaged in like the 40s and the 50s for rebounds in a game. If you really go back and look at some of the and this is when in the NBA, it was a little rough and tumble. It wasn't like they had Jordan rules. They changed rules to hold him back. The other players had rules that enhanced their game and actually helped them become better players. But they put rules in place for him and for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, which actually held them back as players. So as you weigh both of those things in a formula, I think you got to give some credence to that. A couple of those guys got the red carpet, and a couple of these other guys got the hard way up. And Chamberlain was a guy that they changed the dunking rule for him. They want people dunking the ball because he could do it so easily. And it seemed like he was just almost ruining the game because of the ease at which he moved. But if you ever saw him on the beach volleyball court and watched his Olympic record's ridiculous. He was a decathlete.
Wow.
He was in the Olympics as a decathlete. That's 10 events. Bruce Jenner, now Caitlyn Jenner, was on the face of Wheaties for that, you know. But Will Chamberlain was right there, and look at some of the records that he established during those times. I mean, it's unbelievable. And so I do think he's slightly underrated a little bit. But at the end of the day, if you were picking and you wanted to pick two, if you had Bill Russell or Will Chamberlain, Pete, who would you take?
Will Chamberlain or Bill Russell?
Yep.
Chamberlain.
You take Chamberlain over Russell.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I would.
No?
No, Russell just was such a great winner and a much better athlete than people give him credit for. That's why the Celtics could fast break like they did, because his speed up and down the floor was the one that all your guys up front are always fast. Bob Cousy's like he's a speedball. You know, he gets the ball, it's like boom, you know. But when you had Robert Parrish and you had a guy like this who could run the floor like that, that changes everything about your offense. And now you're actually a fast break team. And that's what the Celtics made their bones on, was fast break.
Okay.
I saw Bob Cousy. Now, maybe they could have done that with Chamberlain, too. You know, Bob Cousy had Chamberlain. I'm sure he would have made something work with that, too. But one thing I saw about Bob Cousy that was really, really interesting, and this is if you're a young point guard out there, Bob Cousy, one of the greats of all time. Obviously, many of you young guys probably never even heard of him.
Oh, I know who Bob Cousy is.
We know who Bob Cousy is, and we've watched him play and saw what an unbelievable basketball magician he was. But Bob Cousy used to say this all the time, and he said this especially on the road. He said, with the Celtics players in the beginning of the game, I want my guys running the lane really, really hard. And so I throw the ball in front of them so they absolutely have to run as fast as they can possibly run to catch that pass. And he said, instead of throwing it right to them, I lead them, and they have to be sprinting as hard as they can possibly sprint to catch that pass. And if you're a point guard, that's when you're going to get a lot of assists, when your bigs and your wings are running as hard as they can possibly run. But I just wanted to take that moment. Field goals attempted. Now we go to Karl Malone, Kobe Bryant, Kobe right there, Michael Jordan, Elvin Hayes. Here's one for you. In field goals attempted, number 7, John Havlicek from the Celtics. Played a lot of years. I was surprised he might have not been on the field goals made list, too.
Got to be top 20.
I would assume.
Yeah.
I would assume. And then it closes out with Dirk Nowitzki, Will Chamberlain, and Carmelo Anthony. I kind of had a funny feeling you might see Carmelo Anthony on there. How about three-pointers made, Pete?
Three-pointers?
Who holds the record right now? He's a current player. Greatest shooter in the game right now.
What's his name? The guy that used to, current player?
Yes.
I'm not sure.
Steph Curry.
Okay.
Most three-pointers made. Ray Allen, I think, is who you were thinking of from UConn days, is in the number 2 spot. I think that record was just previously broken not too long ago. Matter of fact, I know it was. I will go back.
Because I thought Ray Allen was the leader for a long time. So
yeah, he was.
Yep.
He was. And a little snippet, when I was an assistant coach at Colgate University, we had 2 back-to-back NCAA trips. The first year we played Kansas, and the second year we played UConn. And Ray Allen was on that UConn team. And that was a really, really good UConn team. But I remember a referee coming over to me, and there was a timeout kind of situation, and I knew the guy a little bit, and he came over to me, and he goes, "What do you think about Ray Allen?" And I said, "I haven't seen a shooter like that in the whole time I've been coaching." He was just so good with his form, with his setup, and everything. When he caught the ball, everything was already done. If you want to be a good shooter, go back and watch Ray Allen's tapes, or go back and watch Richard Rip Hamilton. It's funny that both of them both played at UConn, but the way that they come into their shot, everything's done before they get into that shot. All the footwork, all the body positioning, everything's done. So if the pass is good, they're going to have a really good high chance of getting off a great shot there. And so Ray Allen, his frame and everything, I just said, he's a can't-miss NBA player. He should be a lottery pick. I think he was. But I said to the ref, I haven't seen a guy shoot the basketball like that in most of the years that I've been there, especially with the size and the frame. It was incredible to watch even as a young man. Number 3 on this list is Somebody, I was a little surprised he's not, but I think he soon will be on the shots attempted list. But James Harden is third on the three-pointer made list. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You know, he's in front of Reggie Miller.
Wow.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by that. Reggie's in four. Maybe when I talk about Ray Allen, if you had a
But Ray had a long career where Reggie wasn't as. I don't think Reggie was as long a career. No.
not as Ray Allen.
Right.
Ray Allen had a really long career, and Ray Allen was smart about his body as well. You know, he could dunk the ball, he could go to the rim, but you saw him really stay in his lane and make a great career out of doing exactly what he could do. Reggie Miller, too. But Miller didn't have the same longevity. He got into the booth a little bit with the broadcasting and everything else.
Yep.
But if you're having a conversation about who are the top shooters of all time, Reggie Miller's in that conversation for sure as an absolute sniper. If you
Yeah.
leave him open, boy, there's a good chance it's going in.
Yep.
And I remember him, what he did to my Knicks back in the day with that shooting display, just an unbelievable display. The thing with Miller, too, was he was 6'6", 6'7", and really lithe. And he could get the ball off really quickly. And his setups were great, but his size and his ability to just be long, in that shooting process really made it, because most shooters that miss, they miss because they're short, not physically short. The shot is short. And when you have that extra little bit of size and that length, and especially in your follow-through with him, he was almost perfect with his form. He really, really could get into a rhythm of shooting the basketball. But when you watch Steph, I think he could get consideration as the greatest of all time. Then you're going to look at Reggie. Chris Mullin was another great shooter of the basketball.
Yeah.
And if you talk about clutch, you want to talk about clutch, you got to throw in Robert Horry. Robert Horry was a big shot maker. You wouldn't put him down as one of the great three-point shot makers of all time. But if you want a guy to take your last second shot, that guy has more buzzer beaters than a lot of people. He was a great, great late-game shooter. You're going to see a lot of current players on this. I'm not sure that Kyle Korver is still in the NBA. I think he might be. He might not be as well, though. Damian Lillard, the gentleman that's been talked about very, very much this year as far as a trade prospect and wanting to get out of Portland. That deal hasn't been done yet. They've been talking about him going to Miami, to some other places. But as for right now, he's with the Portland Trailblazers, and he's sixth on the list as far as threes made. Vince Carter, that's a surprise to me. Great dunker that he was. Jason Terry, another great shooter of the basketball, another guy who learned how to kind of stay in his lane. LeBron James is ninth. That was a little surprising to me as well. But
You think of him more as a penetrator too, right?
yeah, but if you've watched his game evolve over time, I think that you've seen him make some necessary steps in order to keep himself healthy, in order to keep himself, able to produce well at a high level for 82 games. I think you've seen him kind of adjust his game a little bit. I would say if you took a shot chart of his shooting early in his career, it would be a lot closer to the basket, a lot more dunks, a lot more open floor plays. And again, I thought that was when he was the point guard and really had the ball in his hands most of the time. I think that's been a mistake with some of the coaches that have been around him right now, is that they don't just let him have the ball and go, because he's just so good at it. And let him be a scoring point guard, let him do his thing, but he's just really good at that open court stuff. But again, he's a little older now, so they might be trying to cut some of that down, because that's stuff that's high impact on the body. That stuff has a lot of force on the body, and if you want to stay in the game and set records like this, you got to be careful about your body.
Yeah.
And so, three-pointers attempted, we could go through that real quick. You got Steph Curry. James Harden's number 2, although he's 3 on the list. Ray Allen, LeBron James, Reggie Miller, Damian Lillard, Jamal Crawford, Vince Carter, Jason Terry, and Paul Pierce makes the list. I can't believe that he's not on the list for makes.
Okay.
For three-pointers made, Paul Pierce. I would have had him. I think I would have had him there.
His percentage must be wicked low.
Possible. The most free throws made, I thought, was interesting, too, because if I had closed my eyes I had looked at this thing and I said, okay, who is the leading, without looking at it, who is the leading person that took the most free throws in the game? And I would have thought maybe Shaquille O'Neal, and we'll see if he's on the list. Maybe Michael Jordan, maybe LeBron, but they weren't at the top of the list. Karl Malone, number one, for most free throws attempted. Moses Malone, we got the Malones up on the top. Moses Malone is in the number 2 spot. This doesn't surprise me at all because he had a game that was based upon reading defenders and taking advantage of defenders. Kobe Bryant in the 3 spot. He knew how to get fouled. I'm going to be surprised if Iverson's not on this list. No, he's not. But his longevity might not have been there. LeBron James is 4th. Oscar Robertson, number 5. Michael Jordan, number 7. Dirk Nowitzki, 8. Jerry West, 9. And if you put Jerry West on the foul line, you might as well put those 2 points in the book. And I'm a little surprised here that Rick Barry's not on this list because Rick Barry was a gentleman who shot like 90% underhanded. He was the gentleman who took the ball from the referee and shot the ball underhanded and was in the high 90%. Probably one of the greatest. Him and Calvin Murphy probably have the greatest single-season free throw percentage of all time. I'll see if that's in here. Paul Pierce is last. Jerry West is 10th. Oscar Robertson. Very interesting. Really interesting. All right, we'll go one more and then we'll jump into college.
Okay.
Okay? So, who has the most turnovers? NBA history.
Most turnovers.
Most turnovers. This is interesting. I would not have picked any of these 2 gentlemen to be in the top 2. I see 3. I wouldn't have picked 4. I wouldn't have picked 5 either.
Jeez, I don't know.
Number 1, turnovers.
Dennis Miller?
Nope.
No. Dennis Rodman.
Dennis Rodman. No. LeBron James. Number 1.
Is that because he's got the ball so much?
Of course. And you're going to be surprised on this list, I think. Number 2, Karl Malone. That one I was really surprised at because he was a pick-and-roll guy that caught the ball around the basket really, really,
Yeah, what'd you think? He had pretty sure hands, right?
He did have sure hands, and so I'm but here's the thing on the sure hands thing, okay? This is why I'm surprised that this number's so high, and this is what I'll just give you for 1 second. John Stockton and Karl Malone are in a pick-and-roll.
Mm-hmm.
John Stockton throws the ball. It hits Karl Malone dead in the hands.
Yep.
Everybody in the arena sits there and says, man, he should have caught that. Stockton still gets the turnover. Malone doesn't get the turnover. And so that's why I was surprised as much as I was about Malone being high on this list because you have to be a passer really to be high on this list, and he's certainly not noted for that. So I was surprised to see him in the number 2 spot. Russell Westbrook, current player right now. I think what this tells me a little bit, though, is I really loved going through this because as a coach, it told me some things. And what it told me is when you see, because Red Auerbach and John Wooden, a lot of the coaches used to espouse, stop looking so carefully at your turnover totals. Because if you don't have high turnovers, you're not taking enough chances. And I always thought that was a little bit odd, but those are like the 2 wizards of basketball. So I investigated it a little bit myself, and I was surprised to come up with that. That if you look on this list, John Stockton's on the list also. So the guy who leads in assists is also leading in turnovers. Now that means he tried a lot of passes, to his teammates, and some of his teammates didn't catch the ball, which led to him. Stockton was a great passer, so that would lead to him getting some higher numbers there. But then, I'm
always trying to get the ball moving around, so you're taking.
Yeah, it's just what I described to you a minute ago. If it hits Mark Eaton, who's their 7'4" center, in the head,
right,
and bounces out of bounds, everybody says, God, he should have caught that thing. But Stockton will get the turnover because he's the one who threw the pass.
Right.
So it's not totally surprising, but he was such a great passer. I'm surprised John Stockton's 4th on the turnover list. Kobe Bryant is fifth. Jason Kidd. So I'm talking about, I think, Stockton and Jason Kidd, Isaiah Thomas. If you want to talk point guards, the three, best guys you want to run your team, I think, that I've seen pretty much. I'm sure there's some others in there, but those three really stand out to me. Jason Kidd, one of the greatest of all time. He's second on the assist list. And so for him to be second on the list and be in the sixth slot, it's pretty good, actually, because Stockton's one and he's in the four spot. So to me, those kind of things seem like you got to take some chances if you want to be a great player. That's what it's saying to me.
Yep.
You got to play and read it and see what you see and take the chances that you take. And I think that's what's indicative of this. It was really interesting for me. Moses Malone, 7. James Harden, number 8. Now, as much as he controls the ball, those are what I would call 1.5 turnovers. Because they're turnovers, like we alluded to before. John Stockton throws the ball to Karl Malone. Karl Malone fumbles it out of bounds. That's a turnover. But it was a turnover because you were trying to do the right thing. Now, James Harden will maximize the ball sometimes. He'll hold on to it for 15 seconds out of the 24-second clock and then dribble it off his leg. And that's just him by himself, isolated in this turnover kind of silo that he's in, where nobody else touched the ball. Everybody else is standing there. Everybody now has to run back on defense. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes that. So him being as high on his turnover list, I think he should even be higher because of the context of some of his turnovers. I think that might seem weird to people when you say that. Stats are stats.
So it's a deceptive stat.
He has this number. But, you're talking about a guy who's coming down the floor. He's got two guys running the wings, and bang, he makes the right play, hits him right where he should hit him, but still gets credit for the turnover, as opposed to a guy who's choking the life out of the basketball, stringing it on the dribble, and then nobody else touches it. There's not really a whole lot of good team synergy happening at that moment, and then the ball rolls off his leg. The defense takes great pride in that, and the offense is defeated significantly by that. So when you watch the Lakers Showtime, Magic Johnson might throw one over Jamal Wilkes' head, but Wilkes knows he's looking for me. He's going to find me. I'm going to keep running. And so when you play with James Harden, he's not looking for you. There's no reason for you to run because he's not going to get it, up the floor like these other guys do. And so I'm surprised to see him where he is, but also where he was with the other stuff. Isaiah Thomas, ninth on the list. I loved Isaiah Thomas as a player. He went in. This is the God's honest truth. Karl Malone and him were in a game. He was playing for the Pistons. Malone was for Utah. And Malone was a big guy. He was 6'9", 260 pounds. And Isaiah came down the lane with a layup, and Malone just absolutely clipped him across the head with an elbow. It was dirty. It was a cheap shot. But what happened with the Pistons was, and this is what you got to understand about this whole cycle of violence when you start it, especially what happened in the NBA with the Pistons. Bill Laimbeer and Rick Mahorn were taking Michael Jordan out of the air.
Yep.
That was their whole thing. We're the bullies. We're going to knock you out. But then they turned that same target on their own guys, which was Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, and some of the other guys who weren't as big and physical as them. The other team took it out on their superstars as well. So all you did by embracing that whole bully style was put a target on your own player's back. Malone comes down and lays Isaiah Thomas out. I mean, he hits him in the forehead and causes him to get like over 50 stitches in the forehead. Okay? Isaiah Thomas returns to the game that same game and plays. And so people would look at Isaiah Thomas and say, wow, he's not, he's kind of pretty, and he played basketball pretty, but man, I saw this guy, he went down the lane, he took it, and most guys are going to spend the night in the hospital and say, yeah, I'll catch Malone next time we roll through Utah. Not him. He came out, stitched it up, and rolled it right back up, and unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. I saw the same thing with Allen Iverson. We played Georgetown when I was at Colgate. It was a regular season game. It was at Georgetown. And we had a kid on our team, and we used to do a drill where if you got to a loose basketball, you didn't dribble it. You picked it up and you cleared it by moving your arms up in the air and kind of creating space with your elbows.
Yep.
So this kid was a very, very fundamental player, and him and Iverson are going for the loose ball. He clearly has the ball. He comes up, and turns and clears over his shoulder, and he clips Allen Iverson in the eye with an elbow.
Ooh.
And this kid is like bony Maroney. So when he hits you with an elbow, it's like his whole bone is just hitting you right in the eye socket.
Yep.
You know, he's 125 pounds of bone, you know? And so he clips Iverson in the eye and blows the whole thing open. And I'm sitting there saying, oh, you know, and I looked up at the clock. We were down by like 25 points at the time. And it's early in the game. And you're sitting there when you're down by 25 that early in the game. Game's televised on ESPN. And you're just sitting there going, God, I hope my friends back home don't see me.
Right.
You know, you're kind of hiding. You're holding a towel over your head, you know. It's one of those guys. And so I turned to the head coach, Jackie Bruin, at the time, and I go, well, Jack, at least, you know, we're down 25, but at least we don't have to deal with Iverson anymore. And he just turns, he looks at me, and he laughs and goes back to coaching and sees it, you know. About 10 minutes later, here comes Iverson out of the locker room. And he's stitched up. And
now he's pissed.
Absolutely looking for somebody to take this out on.
Now he's
okay?
pissed.
And Iverson was street, okay? Allen Iverson was a street kid, a great, I mean, like he called it like he saw it, and he was a guy that came out, and if there was something to do, okay, now it's on. And so this led to one of the greatest athletic moments that I've ever seen in basketball. So this is, I'll finish the story with this, is that he comes back into the game. He's all stitched up now, and you can see it under his eye, and he's got this look on his face like of intensity that I'm going like, oh, God, we're going to lose by 60. Forget 25. He's just going to wreck us for the rest of the day.
Sure.
We had 2 6'10" players at the time, and we used to play them together in kind of a Twin Towers setup. And they were both very good players, and one of them was an incredible shot blocker. So the ball breaks loose underneath the basket, and our 2 big guys are kind of looking for it, and it's a loose ball, and everybody's kind of fumbling around for it. And Allen Iverson is in between these 2 6'10" kids. He comes up with the ball, and out of nowhere elevates off 2 feet with the ball in his hands, turns it up, and dunks it right over the 2 6'10" guys that we had from a standing position on the floor. He basically picked the ball up off the ground, and it just went straight up into the air with about 30 stitches in his face and dunked on our entire team. I thought that was one of the greatest athletic moments that I had ever seen in my life. I saw Kobe Bryant in high school do some crazy dunks, and of course we talked about Vince Carter, but Allen Iverson, pound for pound, he might, if you had a stat here for who's the toughest guy that ever played in the NBA, I'm going to put him on that list, number 1. All right, let's jump into the college stuff. You're Pistol Pete, okay? We know that.
Yep.
And the first guy on our list right now, and somebody that's just, I idolized as a young man growing up. My whole basketball persona was Pistol Pete Maravich. I adored watching him play basketball. He was a guy who was a little bit older than me, so I'm a 10, 11, 12-year-old kid. Can't wait to turn on one of his games and watch this gentleman absolutely build basketball in the South. Now, let me explain what I'm talking about. I talked about this, I think, on a previous show where I knew a gentleman by the name of Tom Penders, and I knew Tom Penders when he was the head coach at Fordham University. Tom Penders, also a UConn Husky, great athlete in his own right. But Tom Penders climbed up the ladder, went to the University of Rhode Island, and then went on to be the head coach at Texas. And somebody was interviewing him, and he said, Coach, what is the number 1 sport at Texas right now? And the guy was trying to bait him into something, and Tom just honestly said, football. And he said, okay, Coach, well, tell me then, what's the number 2 sport? And Tom Penders answers, spring football. And so when you're talking about Texas, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Deep South, football has been king there for years and years and years. When you see what Pete Maravich and his father did with the LSU program and the entire growth of that entire conference that you look at right now, this is something that's not really attributed to the Maravich family as much as it should be. The SEC conference wasn't the basketball conference that it is today. And right now, it probably is the number 1 basketball and football conference in the entire country. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that way. Football, 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 football. Basketball was an afterthought. But then they started building bigger arenas, started getting people interested in the crowds. But then this young man came along, and it absolutely revolutionized basketball in the South, but also basketball in general. And let me just give you a little bit of perspective on what I mean by that in general. Peace. Okay. This was the Vietnam era. This was an era where we were watching young people come home missing limbs. Guys we used to play with in the schoolyard. Guys would come home and he'd have never play another basketball game with us because he had lost a leg over there. So there was a tremendous amount of that action going on, you know? And as players at that time, players were always kind of brought into this mold by their coaches, by the athletic directors, you know, into this very conservative, not, I don't mean politically, but conservative approach to how you would be viewed as a basketball player. You want to be a good kid. You want America to love you. You know, you want to be a Babe Ruth type. You know, you want to be that all-American kid. And Pete Maravich was able to be that all-American kid in a really, really irreverent style of basketball. The long hair. Coaches didn't like long hair back in the day. They wanted your hair short. They wanted to know you were committed to the program. They wanted to also know that you weren't about girls only. And so the hair was a real big piece with a lot of coaches. His hair was all over the place. It would flop back and forth, and as he made a move, his hair just moved with him, and it was completely part of his whole persona. But it was anti-establishment at the time. And that's the thread, the gray socks. Nobody ever wore floppy gray socks on a basketball court. If you showed up in the gym where I grew up with dark socks on of any color, you got sent home immediately. You got cut immediately, or you never got chosen into one of the games in the schoolyard immediately. He threw on the ugliest pair of floppy gray socks, and just up and down, like his hair, his socks, everything was moving. But when the basketball was in his hands, he was an absolute magician with the basketball. Now, some of that anti-establishment stuff might have been a little easier for Pistol Pete because he played for his father, Press. His father was his college coach. And although Press Maravich, to me, seemed like, oh my God, you know, he looked pretty straight guy. You know, he didn't look like he was all into that stuff. Yep. But somehow they got along, and they made this thing work, you know. And it reminds me of a funny story that a friend of mine used to tell when he was a clinician, and he would talk about Pete Maravich in this way. And I was a Pete Maravich fan. So the fact that he had not only met Pete Maravich but played against Pete Maravich, to me, was like unbelievable. So my friend signs with the University of Georgia, and he was a good player in his own right. And as a young man, he goes into the program, and they're getting ready to play LSU. And so the day before, and this is something I rarely will do with one of my players as a result of this story that I heard, I'll rarely tell them they're covering one of the best players on the other team the night before the game. I'll wait until game time when we do our matchups right before the game, and we'll present it then. We'll talk about it in practice. We'll allude to it, but I won't really go like, okay, we're putting you on Michael Jordan tomorrow.
You don't want to psych your guys out, right?
Well, you don't want them thinking about it too much either, you know? And so this is what happens to my friend Tommy. He now gets told in practice, okay, tomorrow, Brennan, we're putting you on Maravich. And he goes home and he says, I'm in my dorm room in front of my mirror, and I'm doing slides, and I'm moving my hands up and down on defense, and I'm looking in the mirror going, tomorrow the world's going to know about Tommy. Pete Maravich is going down tomorrow. I'm going to take this thing, and I'm going to be the guy everybody's talking about. So he's in his room. He's psyched up. He's ready to go. The game starts, and Pete Maravich comes down and goes bang, 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 and has like 10 points before the three-point shot was in, and has like 10 points. It's like 10-0, and they call timeout. his coach calls timeout. And he was so stuck on staying close to Pete Maravich that he didn't even realize that a timeout had been called. And he walked over so close to Maravich like he was still guarding him that Maravich's father looked up in the huddle and said, "Son, you're in the wrong huddle right now." And he happened to be in LSU's huddle, woke up and said, "Oh my God," walked down the street, down to his own huddle, and I'm pretty sure the coach took him out and said, "Let's try somebody else on him." I'm sure Maravich had 50 that night. There was nothing you could do with him. That's why I wanted to start off that segment with him, because he is a little bit diminished in what his whole, just one guy did for basketball. That one player did for college basketball. I don't know that there's a player. You talk about Magic Johnson, and you talk about Larry Bird and their hookup, and you talk about some of the other great players that have come through there. Some of the great teams, no doubt. But Pete Maravich was an architect. Pete Maravich built places that weren't built before. And when you go into the places where they went, excuse me, which was football country, football was God down in those
Down
places.
south, yeah.
And where they were able to build and what they were able to do down there is nothing short of miraculous. And all of those programs currently, right now, Kentucky, Alabama, LSU, Tennessee, all of those programs right now, even their football programs, have benefited from Pete Maravich's presence. And that's, I mean, how can you, as a college player, to me, he's the GOAT. I'll tell you all day long, I think if you take into the pro thing, I love Larry Bird, but I think, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar might be the greatest player in college of all time. Bill Walton could be given consideration as one of the greatest college players of all time, but I don't think either one of them comes up with, and Maravich didn't have the national titles that these guys had either. But he was just such a joy to watch play basketball.
Yep.
So Antoine Davis is on the 2 list. He almost broke Jordan's record. I mean, Maravich's record, excuse me. And it would have been, I think, a bit of a disappointment to me had he broken it. Because Maravich did his in 4 years without the three-point shot and with all of these different things. And Antoine Davis's career, there's many, many more games than Pete Maravich played. And so he came up really close. He's within 5 points of breaking the all-time record.
Wow.
And I want to say this about Antoine Davis. I think that he's one of the great shooters of the basketball in the game right now. I don't know where his pro career moves. Does he get picked up on an NBA team? I think, there's some possibility there because he really, really can shoot the basketball. But if he winds up in Europe, he's going to spend a long time in Europe because Europe's a shooter's game, and he's a great, great shooter. He's also Mike Davis's son, who was the Indiana coach, and Mike also coached him in college at Detroit Mercy. So really cool story. Really cool story there. I think Freeman Williams, Chris Clemens, these are names that a lot of people aren't going to know, but they're 3rd and 4th on the scoring list. And I was surprised by that. Lionel the Train Simmons is number 5. I got to coach against Lionel Simmons. He had a teammate named Doug Overton. I was at Iona. They were coming in to play us. And I was given a scout, and I had to do the scout against LaSalle with the great coach Speedy Morris. And what I said about Lionel Simmons was, Lionel Simmons is a pro. And he's going to be somebody that's really, really difficult for us to stop. But if you can sit up on his right hand a little bit, we can really, really, I think we can stop him. So I was telling everybody, sit up on his right hand. And so they come out of the game, and they followed my instructions to a T, sat up on his right hand, and he started the game with like 4 spin moves back to his left hand and finished on the other side because it was so easy because our guy was sitting up on his right hand so much. So then they're looking over at the bench at me going, "Coach, you told me to sit up on his right hand. Should I sit up on his left hand now?" I said, just hang on tight. It's going to be a long night. And Doug Overton was on that team as well. That was maybe the best LaSalle team of all time. There was some Tom Gola and some of those guys way, way back in the day, even before I was around. But that LaSalle team might have been probably one of the best of all time, I would say.
Yep.
All right. Number 6 is Alfonso Ford. Again, these aren't a lot of names people are going to be familiar with.
Never quite transitioned to the NBA.
This gentleman is a coach's son. He was a pleasure to watch. And he's number 7 on the list, Doug McDermott. His dad, I said into last week, I consider his dad to be one of the best offensive minds in the game today for basketball. I love the plays they run. I like how they get shots for their players. I love that because I'm a very much a coach that believes that there's a certain rhythm that's associated with basketball. And Doug McDermott really gets the rhythm. His son, 6'10", very skilled, really, really good inside, really, really good outside. And he was a terrific player for his dad at Creighton. Nice to see him on 7th on the list. You got Mike Daum, Daum. Nobody will ever know who that gentleman is. Harry Kelly. Keedron Clark is a good one. St. Peter's College, 10th on the scoring list. He put up a ton of points, and he was a gentleman very similar to a lot of other players that I kind of was around in New York, and he went to Rice High School, I'm pretty sure. And I used to tell a lot of coaches about him, and I'd say, man, this guy can put the ball in the basket. And a lot of coaches didn't like him because he was a little small for a guard, but he was very crafty, skillful, and he went to St. Peter's, and boy, did he really tear it up down there. Hersey Hawkins, number 11, had a really good pro career too, but he scored a ton of points in the college ranks. I mean, a lot of points. 12, Oscar Robertson. Oscar Robertson probably didn't play freshman basketball. So his numbers are on 3 years. That's pretty exciting right there. I'm looking for Bill Walton on this list. I was certain we would have seen him by now. Danny Manning is in the 13th hole from Kansas. Great career at Kansas. Decent career as a pro. Obviously, the dad was involved with him. His dad played in the pros as well. He's coaching somewhere now, too. He's had a couple of head coaching jobs. Elvin Hayes in the 15th spot. Elvin Hayes, great player, unbelievable. Tyler Hansborough from North Carolina, psycho. I saw him jump off a roof into a swimming pool one time, and I thought if Roy Williams was on the ground, that he probably would have had one of his other guys catch him, because this guy comes off the top of the roof right into the swimming pool, and they're playing like Duke in like 5 days after this. I'm sitting there going, no wonder they call him psycho. Larry Bird, 17th on the scoring list for college. That makes a lot of sense. This guy was a great player. A lot of people won't know him, but he had a great name too. Otis Birdsong. Otis Birdsong was a great, great collegiate player. Kevin Bradshaw, interesting name. Kevin Bradshaw went to U.S. International. Allen Houston played for the Knicks. He's in the 20 spot for Tennessee. J.J. Redick is 21st for Duke. I was a little surprised by that. Marcus Howard, Hank Gathers from Loyola Marymount. That was a great one. That was a great team they had. I'm going to look down the list here and just grab a couple of names that everybody will know. 25, Reggie Lewis.
Okay.
Let's see.
Is that because a lot of players now in college, they're not making this list because they don't go 4 years?
And a lot of guys, this is what we talked about a little earlier on a previous show, is the translation to college. You know, I don't know if Mike Davis's son, Antoine, makes it to the pros because he's a little smaller.
Yeah.
Shoots it great and all that other stuff, but does that make it into the NBA? So I think you see a lot of that here is just that next step to the NBA. That's why Scottie Pippen came out of nowhere. But Scottie Pippen was 6'7", 225 pounds, and could move like a steam freight. You know, that's a lot of the NBA. If you don't have that, you're at a disadvantage. If you're Steph Curry's size, you better be the most skilled guy in the playground, and he is. But some of these other guys, you can score a ton of points, you know, at Fairfield University, and it doesn't equate to anything close to being a pro. So I've seen a lot of that over the time. David Robinson at Navy was 31st. Wayman Tisdale, God rest his soul, 32. Lefty, tremendous, unbelievable player. Steph Curry is 35th on the list, and I'm going to leave it there. We can pick back up on that another time. But I really enjoyed looking through that college list because it's like a run-through of the memories that I had all the way through.
Sure.
And so we're closing up now here. I think we got about a minute left, and I swear to God, this is the fastest show in all of television because once we start, I have to write down the exact time that we start because it's not always on right cue. So I always write down, and today I wrote down 11:10 because we're taping a little bit early, and I'm sitting here going 11:10. Now I'm looking at 12:09, and I don't know how we got there.
Yep.
But it's because Pete does a great job, and I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable in this seat, I think. I think we're getting things really rolling here, and I'm really excited to get into this season. But I did want to say there's a lot of little stuff floating around out there. There's some people that aren't feeling well, and especially a friend of mine, Mr. Bob. We're hoping that you're going to get out of the hospital and feel much better. And my ride along here, Pete, a little under the weather too. So everybody, take care of yourselves. It's getting into that little bit of a seasonal thing, and take care of yourselves and do the best you can with everybody around you. We love you. We're in the zone, and we'll see you next week.